Hi, I'm Chanel. Today marks 50 years since the Summerland incident. I spoke to Nick Batey, who was one of the consultant general surgeons on duty that night.
I'm Nick Batey. I was a consultant surgeon at Nobles Hospital on the night that Summerland went on fire.
Right now, can I ask, how old were you at that time?
36.
Were you quite an experienced surgeon at that time, or were you still learning or going through the ropes?
I was still going through the ropes, really, but I had been appointed a consultant here a year before Summerland went up.
And can you tell us about the night? Do you remember moments before everything happened?
Yeah, we were having a meal with John Lee, my colleague, at my house in St John's at that time. And the phone rang and the switchboard operator told me what was going on. So I went into the hospital. What
went through your mind when you got that call?
Probably this could be something or nothing. Something.
So at that moment you didn't know how big the situation was?
No.
And when you got in?
Well, the hospital was busier than I'd ever seen it, which surprised me a bit because I was only about 10 minutes to getting there, and it usually takes a bit longer for people to get there. But of course everybody was being given lifts in private cars and things like that.
You know, sometimes when you watch a movie and they've got a scene of an incident, they go back to the hospital and they show, I don't want to say chaos, but, they show a very busy ER room. Is that the scene that kind of played out?
Yes, it was very busy. But they were already starting to sort the patients out into the ones that needed immediate treatment and the ones who could wait for a little while. I made it official that we would have the emergency plan in force, and so the switchboard operators rang around all the people that needed to know, because we had to call in staff from various departments to deal with the matter. And then we started going through the patients systematically and tried to admit the worst patients first. We emptied 2 surgical wards within about 20 minutes. And that provided us with 40 empty beds, and we had contingency for more if we needed, but fortunately we didn't.
During that whole thing, how was it for the medical professionals? Because it isn't easy, just to see an influx of people and all different types of injuries.
I don't know that we thought about it that much. We just got on and dealt with things. Obviously, the patients who were more seriously ill started treatment first and were admitted and given resuscitating fluids, and the whole sort of routine of burn management was started. I mean, none of us had extensive experience in treatment of burns. I think my whole experience before that had been as a student when I was in the burns unit for a month in Newcastle in the children's ward. So I had some idea, and we had to learn about the treatment when we did our exams as well.
Would you say it was one of the toughest events of your career?
Absolutely, yeah.
Why?
Why? Largely unfamiliarity, I suppose, and, you know, are we going to cope with this or not? Because we were a hospital isolated on an island with which was well equipped, but to deal with one serious burn is very hard work. To deal with approximately 30 was a totally unheralded experience, really.
And was it tough on you because you had people of all different ages? It was adults, it was children, it was a mix.
It's always tough when you're treating children that are sick. But yes, it was tough. But we have had a very good, adaptable staff throughout the hospital, so that made it a lot easier. And we mobilised them and used them as effectively as we could think to do at the time.
I understand I think you spent 3 days at the hospital?
At least 3 days, yes. We didn't manage to get home because the treatment involved frequent dressings of the burns, which had to be done for the children under anaesthetic, and in the case of the adults we could do that under good sedation, and that worked all right. But we first of all had to assess the extent of the burns on each and every patient. There are formulae for doing that, and after a brief look at the book we found it and used it, and it worked pretty well. We certainly got the right amount of fluid in the right time to pretty well all the patients. Some were too serious to save, fortunately not many, and the others we got fluids into them at the appropriate time and speed, because burns are quite interesting. They lose an awful lot of fluid, and most of that fluid is lost in the first 4 hours after the burn, so we had to calculate that in as well, and you use a special fluid which is not blood, but it's plasma, or we did in those days. I think things have changed a bit now. And we rationed that fluid into 3 periods of 4 hours, 2 periods of 6 hours, 2 periods of 6 hours and 2 periods of 12 hours. And that was calculated by what was known as, and probably is still used, the rule of nines, which allows the burn to be measured in volume, so we can allot a percentage of the burn to each region of the body. For example, each leg is 18%, each arm is 9%, and so on. And that worked remarkably well. And we more or less, as time went on, we more or less realised that we'd got the amount of fluid that we were needing to use right. Obviously we were constantly constantly modifying it according to the patient's response. But that part was easier than we thought, except it was time consuming.
You mentioned the rationing. Was it hard at that time, being a little island, and we had this disaster?
Well,
did you all have to call in people from across, get more extra medication?
Yes. It was hard work, yes. We didn't have to call anybody across because most of the patients were summer visitors. And so once we'd got them resuscitated properly and rehydrated and fit to travel, then they were transferred nearer their own homes to specialised burns units. 2 went to Leeds, I remember, and 1 up to Glasgow. Several of the visitors were Irish and went across to Northern and Southern Ireland. And we had enough staff to manage. We did get offers from the Liverpool plastic surgery unit to send people across, but we felt by the time they got there we'd have done most of the work anyway. And so we just carried on. And fortunately, we didn't have any major criticism of the health service, as far as I'm aware.
Was there anything, either that first night or during those first few days, anything that maybe not happened, but anything that stuck out for you? Maybe a conversation with a patient or successfully treating a patient. Was there anything that...
We didn't really have to do anything about the communications. That was taken over by administrative staff from the hospital, and I wasn't really listening to them at the time, so I don't know what they said or how they did it. But it was gratifying not to have people making justified remarks about poor treatment and so on, whereas there were plenty of remarks about how it had happened and why, and whether it should have happened at all. In my view, it should never have happened. There were signs that it was going to. Something like that was going to happen sooner or later. And it did. And sadly, I'm not sure that it couldn't happen again.
Now, each year since then, do you, on the anniversary, do you remember, do you still think of, or does it still take you back to 50 years ago?
Oh, yes. Yes. Most years. It was an experience that I don't think any of us would have wanted.
Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With it being the 50 years, there's more talk about it, there's more events planned and stuff. Have you gone out for anything like that?
No, I haven't been involved at all on this occasion. Was it the 25th? I think it was the 25th anniversary. I was persuaded by the then Dean of the Isle of Man, Archdeacon, of the Isle of Man, to read a lesson at one of the services, which I did do. Actually, I couldn't understand what it meant, but it was a bit above me. But other than that, no.
And when you did attend that 25 years, did you perhaps see any of the patients that you treated the years before?
I have seen one or two who've called in to the hospital, but not very many, no. I think they too wanted to forget it if they could.
You think it will ever be forgotten?
It will be a long time if it is, and it shouldn't.
Did that, so I know you said on the night you used, well, 2 surgical wards were used. So I'm assuming we didn't have a burns unit at that time.
We still don't, because we don't need one. In the previous 2 years, before Summerland went on fire, we'd only admitted 4 patients with relatively minor burns, and only one of them had needed surgical treatment, skin grafts and things. If we'd had any other really serious burns, we'd have started resuscitation then and transferred them to the mainland, to a burns unit. But we didn't.
Thinking back, is there anything you wish you could have done differently?
I don't think so, no. I know that sounds a bit sort of self-satisfying, but I think for something like that, it went very smoothly, and that was entirely due to the goodwill of all the staff, nursing staff, lab staff, porters, ambulance drivers, everybody, just pulling their weight and doing something that was beyond their call of duty, if you like.
After everything had settled, maybe about a week or 2 weeks after, when reality starts to hit, how did you cope?
Well, just went back to work and tried to forget a lot of it. And that wasn't difficult because there's plenty of interest in the rest of the work in surgery.
Do you still think back to Summerland, or do the images still haunt you?
Yes.
Would you like to add anything?
No.
Okay, so tell me about this paper that you put together with your fellow surgeons, and maybe if you can tell me about them, if y'all were together during those during that time and stuff.
Well, we felt that it was a unique event in any hospital, really. It would be regarded in a pucker burns unit as being a disaster if they had to admit even 3 or 4 patients with serious burns and treat them. But bear in mind that the treatment would go on for much longer, because a lot of the patients that we sent to burns units on the mainland went on to have skin grafts and reconstructive surgery and so on. And so we lost immediate touch with them, although some of them wrote to us, and we got messages from other consultants and staff in hospitals, Glasgow, Leeds, where all the major burns units are. Most of those letters were very supportive and quite complimentary, really. So it was nice to get that.
Letters, was it from patients? Was it thanking you?
Occasional ones from patients. Mostly they were from other consultants or doctors who had received their the patients from us. And I mean, one of the patients, sadly, when she went back to Glasgow, didn't do well at all and had serious complications and died somewhat around about a month and a half after the incident. But otherwise, most of them recovered very well. And we had some quite complimentary letters from other consultants and so on how they had been managed in the first instance.
After publishing y'all's paper, has it been used by other hospitals? Have other hospitals referred to it?
No, they've not to my knowledge, unless they've contacted my colleague or some of the nursing staff. I don't know about that. But I do know that it was an event that everybody could learn from. Unfortunately, everybody hasn't learned from it, including the people that design modern buildings and still put inflammable materials in the cladding. For example, in London a few years ago, the block of flats that burnt down. I can't remember. I think we managed pretty well for a place out in the sticks.
The doctors that you wrote this with, they were with you during those 3 days or 4 days?
Yes, all of them. And I think all of them spent most of the time there, because we were just going from one list of patients and going back through them again, treating the burns, because you know, the big areas to dress, and they had to go to theatre and taken back from theatre and that sort of thing. This cream had quite recently been brought onto the market. I had no knowledge of it because I don't specialise in burns, but it was a mixture of silver and an antibiotic, rather like a sulfonamide, called silver sulfadiazine, which, as you might expect, contains silver. And that was a game changer in the management of the burns themselves, because it had the sulfonamide antibacterial action, something in silver which affected the healing favourably, and it was easy to apply. The only problem was that before you'd put one kind of dressing on and leave it for a week. With this one you had to change it on a daily basis, except that we couldn't because we didn't have enough time. So it was mainly on a 2 daily basis unless there was a reason for it. And this material, which is called flamazine, proved to be just amazing. I can remember when I worked in the children's burns unit, the overriding thing in the ward was the smell of burns, and it's very distinctive. And that was due to the fact that pretty well every burn inevitably got infected. In this instance, as if you read that, you'll see that we had a almost negligible infection rate in the burns, and they became graftable, because you can't put skin grafts on an infected site and expect them to take. the infection rate was negligible, so restorative treatment could be started earlier. But we had nothing, apart from 1 or 2 patients that lived on the island. We had none of that to do.
If I can ask, I think my last question is, you mentioned Grenfell and the building materials. Do you think maybe we should be a bit more aware of the materials we're using just to prevent things like this happening?
Well, the people that design houses should be, and buildings. And they knew about it at the time. They knew that these materials were flammable.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Little Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.